Hello and welcome to Android Developers Backstage. I'm Tor Norbert from the Android Developer Tools and Libraries team. And I forgot to introduce my co-host, Chet.
Oh, hey everybody. I'm Chet Haas from Chicago for the next 2 days.
I'm Alon Albert. I'm from the Android Studio team.
I'm Graham Hinchley from the Android product management team.
And I'm Piyush Mehrotra. I work in Android Backup and Restore.
All right, that was quite a mix of teams. So what are we going to talk about today?
Well, it's a mix of teams because we're doing a cross-team collaboration. We're trying to make it easier for Android developers to use and test Android Backup and Restore.
Very worthy goal. You know, I remember I was very happy to give my wife a new phone a couple of years ago. And about a day later, I kind of regretted it because she was so upset that all of her logins hadn't persisted. She had to go and set up a whole phone again. I was like, yes, we should fix this, right? It is a pain for users when they transfer a phone, and ideally it should just be, get a new phone, plug the cables together, and off you are, with all the same levels and whatever games you're playing and all the logins, but that is not the case. And I guess there's a reason for that. There's a reason why Android can't do it 100% automatic. What is that reason?
Well, I think first of all, it's gotten a lot better in recent years. I think right now we're at a problem where there's certain apps that don't do it. And then it's kind of a surprising experience when a lot of the things do restore properly, but then you have this random app that doesn't work.
Sorry, can I stop you there? When you say don't do it,
it meaning restore their settings from your previous phone.
Okay.
So
there are APIs that they could be using to say now bring in all the stuff you used to have from the cloud.
So there are APIs, but some apps choose to opt out of it because it makes their life easier. Because for some reason, the default implementation that we have for backup and restore doesn't really work for them. I think Piyush can talk more about what exactly happens there. But from my personal experience as a user is I know it's gotten a lot better over the years. And from my experience as a developer, I know that one of the reasons for that is because backup has been turned on by default when you create an Android app. So we have default implementation for backup and restore, but that works for the naive case. And more complicated apps have problems with it, and some of them either disable it or they do the wrong thing sometimes, and we get conflicts.
The problem is that I think a lot of the big apps that a lot of people use are the complicated ones.
Right.
And so the consumer experience is often, I don't know what the percentage is, and maybe actually, Piyush or Graham, you have some stats on this. Do we know or can we share any statistics on kind of percentage of top apps that do back up correctly?
Yeah, I don't think we would necessarily go into specific percentages. We see some very good examples of top apps that do, but also some top apps that don't, that are very visible. I think just to pick up on the last point, it is true, it is hard for developers because there's a lot of different permutations, the versions of the app that they're coming from, and to potential differences in the device SDK and OEM implementations. So it's not easy, which is why having the ability to test these flows as close to reality as possible is really so critical to help developers do this. But I think,
do we have any ways for developers to test?
Traditionally,
that was a yeah.
Maybe I'll talk about traditionally, and then Alon and Piyush, maybe you can talk about what is this now. So traditionally, the answer is yes, but you had to run a number of ADB, BMGR commands. There was some script available to make it slightly easier, but it was pretty laborious, pretty clunky, very easy for something to go wrong. So yes, technically, but very hard previously until the recent improvements.
I think even worse than that, it wasn't a script that was shipped with anything. It was a script on a developer page. So it tended to get, off sync with the actual implementation. So sometimes the script worked because it was current, but then there was like a little code creep.
And was this a shell script, or was it like a bat script?
Yeah.
How do you deal with Windows? And
So it wasn't even it was a list of it. It looked like a script in the development, like in the documentation.
the recipe, basically.
But it wasn't a downloadable script. You would just like copy the commands probably, and maybe I would like if a developer wanted to take this seriously, I would assume that they would create their own script based on that with some error checking, and so we took all that guesswork out, right? And
So that was the bad old days.
Yeah.
What's the current situation?
So now we have. Basically, we automated that script. We built it into Android Studio. So Android Studio runs the commands, the same commands, almost the same commands that are in that script, and it runs that for you from the UI. So we have a UI that drives this script, so to speak.
So you have your app running on your device or in the emulator in some state, and then we have a button, which is you can use to then capture a backup.
Yeah, so you have a button that you capture a backup. You tell it, you configure it a little bit. There's a few ways you can run the backup, a few modes. You tell it where you want to store the backup. You can put the backup as part of your project. You can check it into source control if you want to share it with other users, or you can put it somewhere private. It tries to handle most of the error cases that we know of, and it gives you like guidance on how to fix them. We even have a way to automatically restore from a run configuration. So you can, when you start an app, you can automatically have it restore from backup you took previously. And we also have configurations for if you can run the restore when you're rebooting the app for the first time. This is like very useful for a new device. Like you have maybe because you don't want to run the restore operation takes a little bit of time. So you may want to only do it on the initial install. So we have support for that as well.
So this is useful if, even if you're not testing backup, if you just have a preferred setup for your app, it's really convenient to do this.
Actually, I think that's the nicest thing about this feature. I think it kind of gives incentive. Let me clarify what you said in case it wasn't very clear. So I come from, right now I'm on Android Studio team, but I come from Android development. And a lot of times I find myself working on a specific feature that needs the app set up in a certain way that might take several minutes to close to an hour maybe to set up, like log in and stuff. Not just log in, set up the database add items to your app, like configure, like it takes time to configure all these things. And typically the only tool that I had was just to do it, maybe save a snapshot of the emulator. But then if I want to do it on a different emulator, a different device.
And here comes a new system image, and now your snapshot's invalid.
Right.
Do it all over again.
Yep, exactly. So the nice thing about this feature is that it incentivizes developers to use Backup Restore as a tool, which puts pressure on the team that's responsible for Backup Restore in the app, which might be different people, to make it work properly. So if I'm a developer and Backup Restore doesn't work for me, I can file a bug internally, and that is typically a lot more effective than a user filing a bug. Users typically won't file bugs on stuff like that. They don't expect it to work to begin with.
And it's a one-time thing, so
right.
Yeah. Interesting. So going back to the whole idea that Studio implemented these scripts, I thought we had some new dependency on GMS. So what was that? I mean, we must have done something additional here beyond just the old famous A to B commands.
Right. So Piyush can talk more to that, but the basic idea was that the existing scripts only worked on device. There was no way to export the backup file off of the device and put it on the host. So that could work.
So making it reusable wasn't possible
right.
before.
So I couldn't back up from device A and restore to device B.
Okay.
And that's where GMS core comes in, the dependency.
Yeah, so Piyush, can you talk a bit more about this?
Yeah. Like as Alon mentioned, like the script, the script that's there on the developer website, it doesn't allow the developer to test backup and restore across devices. They are limited to testing it on the same device. So to make it possible for the backup data to be taken out of the device is where like the whole GMS core changes comes in. there's sort of no companion app or like companion service of Android Studio that runs on the device, which could facilitate this moving of backup data. So like the crux of the change was to add the ability for the backup data to be extracted out of GMS app space, and like how to do that securely and under the right conditions.
Yeah, it's really nice though. It means that it works out of the box. No need for us to install extra junk on your phone.
Right.
Yeah. I have a newbie question. I never really understood the different backup types, right? So when you take a backup right now, we will ask you, do you want this to be device to device or cloud backup or whatever? Why are these things different? Like, why isn't it just a backup that has all the state?
Yeah, I think Piyush can talk to that, or Graham. Yeah.
Yeah, but perhaps I can give the kind of high level from a product perspective, and Piyush can have the more technical level. So as a user, you're not always guaranteed to have your existing device when you restore to a new device. You may have lost it and may have broken it. And that's why we try, if the user opts in, to do a nightly cloud backup of your device. But because it's a cloud backup, there are some limitations in terms of the amount of data that can be backed up. So for apps at the moment, that's 25 megabytes. Whereas if you're doing a direct device-to-device restore, so you've got both devices on your person connected via cable or wirelessly, the amount of data that can be restored for an app is much greater, in the order of 1 to 2 gigabytes.
I see. So I actually demoed this feature recently at Google I/O. And
nice little drop there.
Yeah,
nice little reference.
To get the view count to compete with my colleagues. No, just kidding. And so I was demoing a podcast app, and when I was first testing this, it was really slow, and I was like, I don't have a lot of time. How do I do this? And I realized what was happening was that it's really doing a full backup. I had downloaded, hundreds of megabytes of podcasts. This is all part of the settings with the app that actually backs up, and it actually is nice. Right? That when you transfer, to a new phone, all the episodes you had downloaded before and wanted to be available offline are still available offline. You don't have to then go and rediscover this. So that was a feature, but it certainly made the backup massive. When I realized this, I'm like, okay, I'm going to have a new install that only has a little bit of data so it can back up in a few seconds, because obviously pulling hundreds of megabytes off the device and back to it takes time. So that makes perfect sense to me, that you wouldn't want to back that up. So when I'm testing this feature, I should have done a cloud backup as opposed to device-to-device backup, to have it only extract data that we designate as eligible for cloud backup. How do we make that determination? How do we know what data is suitable for cloud?
So this is something that the developer can configure in their backup config in their manifest. They can specify which folders, which files they want to back up specific to cloud backup, and they can include certain larger files that they would want to restore onto a new device under device-to-device backup. So those are kind of the different things. And
so it's entirely the developer's control about what goes to where.
Yeah. Okay. And I think one more important distinction which developers can use this is they might have some sort of security or compliance thing where they don't want their data to go into, let's say, some Google servers. So they could just specify that these are the certain things that they want to transfer only if it was a device-to-device transfer. It's not leaving.
I see. So if it's something that might be designated as very personal data.
Yeah.
And then you could say, well, I'm okay with this going device to device, but the user may not be okay with this being backed up anywhere remotely.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think that answers my question.
More to your question, it's not just for that purpose that you can choose backup restore, like backup to the cloud or device to device. That if you're using it as a developer who wants to restore a setting, then maybe that's what you want to do. But if you're actually testing backup and restore, you probably want to do both. You want to ensure that your backup works in both cases.
Yeah, at least if your backup descriptor does make a distinction between them.
Yeah,
that makes perfect sense.
So I was curious, we've been talking sort of generically about backing up the data for an app, but there's so much there's so many different kinds of data, and I kind of wonder to what extent are there APIs to allow the developers to categorize, these are the kinds of things and the priorities or where I'm putting them or whatever, versus we just leave it up to the developer. So I'm like you mentioned settings, obviously that's one. There's also like login and authentication related stuff. There's, the game save data, and there's, different priorities for all of these things. Like, is that up to the developer, or do we have like categories in the API for here's how to back up this kind of data?
It's all coming from the backup descriptor, right? Like, is there anything that we back up that is not listed in the backup descriptor that you point to from your manifest?
Well, it depends. So I think the answer is yes, and also it depends. So again, Piyush can talk more about this, but just to bring things up, we also restore permissions, app permissions. That is done by some other entity than the backup manager itself.
Just to be clear, if my
runtime permissions.
Yeah, so if my app depends on location permission, and I've already asked the user, and the user said, yes, you can have location permission, then on a new device, that would transfer.
Yes, I believe that is for location, it will work. I know for sure for notification it works, because that was like the use case.
That was your test.
That was the use case I used, we do that, and that doesn't happen from the BMGR executable. So the script that we talked about before didn't do that.
Yeah,
we actually
this
simulate
isn't even like
that.
an app setting, really, right? Like this is
yeah, right. It's
the
not
OS
an app
is
setting.
doing on your behalf.
Yes, exactly.
It's very nice that we did that.
Yeah, so we're kind of like helping out there. We're faking it. We're simulating what the OS would have done, right?
Yeah, the restore credential or like restore keys. That's also something that's part of this like app state that we back up.
Can you say more? What is this token? What is it used for?
This restore credential is something that allows the developer to store like accounts associated with their app in some way, so that like these are restored when the user moves to a new device, and like these are integrated smoothly with like some backend systems that have already implemented passkeys. So yeah, I think like there's like really one powerful scenario that comes to my mind as to what would happen if an app is integrated with restore credentials. So let's say that a user moves to a new device, and we back up and we restore all the backup data, and we restore these credentials onto that app. The app developer can log in the user in the background and start sending notifications and like things without the user opening the app. And yeah, I think like that is something that like is really powerful for a developer.
Interesting. I think I'm like, can you give an example of a service that uses this authentication token?
Example of a...
Like would this include like Google login? I guess that's special because you've logged in on the whole
Google login
phone,
I think
maybe.
is special, but for any app that has an account, right? So some apps, you can already see that in some apps explicitly.
Let's say Netflix, for example. Like if I've logged into Netflix, is there an auth token that we understand as an auth token, or did the developer put in their backup descriptor, here's my auth token? Like, do we treat this in any other way than just app data?
I believe we do, yes.
Yeah, so like I think app data is separate. Restore credential manager, this is like a separate service which developer has to write some code for.
I see.
To kind of store those auth tokens into the service.
So there's like some system API for this. Yeah. And I understand.
And then there's another way to configure backup is if you can. The biggest change I think that Backup Restore did at some point was to do a default implementation of backup that just backed up and restored all your data files, so all your shared prefs and your databases indiscriminately, right? It would just back up everything and restore everything. And that like brought in automatically onboarded like a ton of apps, right? And then we started finding that if you just do that blindly, it breaks things because you could have like an auth token somewhere that's tied into the signature of the device, and or it's only allowed to be used from one device. So you restore it on one phone and it breaks the other phone, or it doesn't work on the new phone because it was created for the old phone.
And this is when the developer goes and says backup equals off.
Right. And that's when they turn it off, right? Yeah. So then we started adding ways to control this, and we say, okay, we want to exclude this file, which contains maybe that bad key that we were restoring. And it grew from that. And then before we had that per file support, we had what's called a key value backup agent, which we can, instead of backing up these files, we can store specific values with a key value map. And that is still supported today. So we still have a way for users to configure their own backup agent, which will run their own code, which will control very, very specifically what they back up and restore. I'm not sure what the adaptation of this is. Do you guys know?
In terms of the adoption?
Of backup manager, like key value pairs.
Again, I think it's kind of difficult to express the percentages. A lot of apps do still use key value backups because, like you say, that was a traditional way of doing it, and it gave developers a bit more control. And I think often actually apps don't need to back up that much data. Like, your key settings, shared preferences, authentication token, if you choose to do that, can be quite small. But I think really all this comes back to like developer engagement with these tools are so critical. Like, we think we have a range of solutions. The restore credentials thing Piyush just mentioned, that is in an early access program, so that's kind of coming out soon. But we think kind of across key value backup agent, restore credentials, and a few other things that exist, most developer use cases to getting a user back in the right state straight away and ready to go should be supported. And if they're not, we'd love to hear about it so that we can fill some of those gaps.
You said there's like a default, right? We turned it on by default. And so what exactly are we picking up then? Like, if I put stuff into the bundle that is passed to my onCreate, is that state backed up?
No, I don't think so. I think I'm not sure if it takes all the files in the data directory. It might take just the shared files in shared prefs, databases, and files maybe. Piyush, you can...
Yeah, so it backs up like all the data that the app has, except I think two directories. One is like cache and one is a no backup directory. Except that, everything that's there gets backed up by default.
So you might need tweaking because like sometimes like for example, Compose has its own database, right? Or not Compose, like Work Manager has its own database. So that is a file that you probably want to exclude from your backup. You don't want to include like if you're restoring to a new device, the jobs that...
Then it feels like Work Manager should have put that in the no backup folder.
Maybe.
That's our team also. So maybe we should have a chat afterwards. Yeah. Okay. Good to know.
Yeah, I think that's true. We try and encourage correct usage of these directories. It's not always easy to do that. But I think the other thing I would say is with cloud backup, because of the 25 megabyte limit, obviously if we're just backing up everything that's not in the cache directory, an app will very quickly go over that limit as well. So it's really important that developers think about this cloud backup use case because, there's a pretty even split between device to device and cloud backup and restore. And if you're only thinking about one and not the other and not thinking about the limit, you risk a user either not having a backup or potentially having a quite dated backup.
I'm glad Tor asked about that because I had no idea that there was a difference. I just made an assumption that, well, if I got a device, it's going to be faster because they're going to talk directly instead of going up to the cloud and back. I wonder if there's some messaging thing to make it a little more obvious to the user. Maybe this is my feature request. Like, instead of just calling it cloud backup, because cloud is kind of synonymous with storage these days. It's like, sure, yeah, cloud is great. Without knowing that you're actually just getting a subset of what you actually wanted. I don't know. Just seems like there's a possibility.
I agree with your point, but I'm sitting there and I can't really think of a really good name for it, right? Like if I think of backup? Like the Google Photos case, right? Like, yeah, like you don't want all the, I guess maybe the concept is the stuff that you can't restore from the cloud, right? That's what you generally want, right?
I think that's valid, right? I think a lot of apps have their own cloud storage and the user can bring it back down. And I think by default, we want to be respectful of users' kind of network, their bandwidth, and also the storage cost, right? Like it costs to store this data, and there are energy costs associated with it. So we really sort of, I think, have tried to find the right balance with cloud backup of like 25 megabytes is a sensible limit for apps to store most of their key data, and they often sync other stuff, or other stuff is re-downloadable from elsewhere. But when we can do it device to device and we don't have those limits, we could transfer more.
And it feels like then, like what Google Photos should do, maybe this is what they do, I haven't looked, right? But when you're downloading stuff from the cloud, that should go in the cache folder, right? Because because that arguably is cacheable then when it's something that can be restored. And so then backup would work out of the box. So what you really want is for people to make sure they're calling the right folder when they're storing things, and to really think of that distinction. So when I take a photo, it should not go in the cache folder because it hasn't been backed up yet. But the moment it makes it to the backup, well, now I can move it.
Yeah, I think what this feature does in Android Studio, it'll kind of force or encourage developers to think about these things, right? Because they will be experiencing, if they do use it for their own day-to-day quality of life, like setting up devices, and there's friction.
I remember, I had a friend who used to work at Netflix, and they had something called the Chaos Monkey. And it would basically just go and randomly kill servers because their infrastructure was supposed to recover. And I'm wondering if we should have like a studio Chaos Monkey that just deletes stuff in your data folder every now and then, just to make sure that you're on your toes with backup. Take a backup, delete some files, and see what happens.
Yeah,
I'm sure that won't result in any bug reports.
Yeah, but that's a very valid case actually for backup and restore. I mean, it's less so that arbitrary files go missing, but often apps store some critical data in key store. Now, key store does not leave the device, so cannot be restored to a different device at the moment. So if you're relying on that for your encryption key, say, and the data within your data directory is encrypted, your data will come across, and then you'll try and access the key store key, and that won't exist. And so that's a kind of classic error that we have to deal with, or developers have to deal with.
But why is that the case? Like, why would my keys not go device to device?
So I think you probably need a security expert on this one, but I think that the fundamental architecture constrains that. But maybe Piyush can give more details.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that much in detail, but I think key store has it kind of it stores the keys using some hardware-based encryption, and I think
it's like a one-way transfer function that you can't.
Yeah, it's not possible the way that it's built for those keys to be extracted out of the device.
So, related question: when we were talking about the default before of copying all of the stuff in data besides the no backup and cache stuff, I guess it made me wonder, where does that break down? Like, what are the problems that people run into with the default not working, and then what can they do about it? Because this, I think from what we were saying before, this is the trigger for some people to just say, well, this doesn't work, turn it off.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we already mentioned was large data sets. So if the app has more than the quota that's assigned to it, then that would be an issue. We won't back up anything. And the second thing is let's say if they have some login token stored in some sort of file, and let's say if the login token is associated or relies on the device ID, then even if we back it up and restore, it won't actually do anything. The user won't be logged in because that token is not valid because it's not on the same device. So things like that is an issue. And I guess one more thing that we have seen from the UXRs that we have done is apps have to ensure that this data could be coming from an older version of the app. So it's possible that the database version was different on that. The data could be in a different structure. So they need to be able to handle conflicts and how to deal with that stale data.
I want to go back to the comment you made about database versions. So let's say I'm using, I have a database using Room or something, and then I have a backup, and then I changed, I added some new column. I'm not really a database person. I'm not sure how to make it incompatible. Like, okay, let's say I changed the type of a column. That certainly would be bad. What happens then, right? If I'm loading up a backup and, I've changed from strings to ints, of one of my data
So
types.
luckily that's already handled by the whatever database scheme you're using. If you're using Room or if you're using the traditional Android SQL database, there's an upgrade path. You have to create an upgrade path.
So you implement like a migration?
Yeah, so you would implement, and regardless of backup and restore, this works. So this scenario that you just described, it will happen also when you upgrade the app, regardless of backup and restore. You upgrade the app, you bump the version, and you have to migrate, right? The way it's done in code is you bump an integer, that's the version number of the database, and then you have migration path from each version to each other version. And without that, a bunch of other stuff will fail.
Okay. So this is actually stored with the database too. So it knows like, oh, this is version 2, this is version 4. Let me run migrations to 3 to 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's like orthogonal to backup restore. What backup and restore will do is it will stress test that, because usually you'll be updating one version at a time. And with backup and restore, you can potentially restore version 1 to version 1000.
That's the best practice, right? You should have each one of these versions.
Yeah, so a proper app developer will have upgrade tests from each version to each version. I would typically I would go through each migration in my unit tests.
Oh, that's okay. That's an interesting point. All right. So far we talked about in Studio clicking buttons. Now you said unit test.
Yeah. That was a
Tell me more.
So we don't have the team that does the testing, the unit testing part of this, but we also have a integrated with JUnit, and we have tests that can perform backup restore in a unit test. So there's various ways you can do it. You can either prepare a backup image that you want to test a specific backup in a restore test, or you could have a test that actually does the backup and then the restore, and in between, like do whatever you want with the database, and then you can validate that the restore worked properly. So all that is now testable, not just manually, but also as
Oh, by now, we should say this is in development.
In development, yeah.
So not
by now, I mean is what I can do.
Yes, but this is building all the same primitives from that we.
Yes, it uses the same code, right?
Yeah.
Send your code to Alon. He'll test
I'll test it for you. Yeah, for a small fee.
This tools talk made me wonder. So Tor, you can tune this out because you're not interested in lint at all. I wonder, are there things that the tool should be flagging for developers so that they know that they could be doing more for backup and restore? Let's say you have an old app and somebody long ago turned this thing off and you don't even realize that it gets turned off because these apps are so complicated and long-lived. Is there something?
There's already a lint warning for this that I happen to have written, which warns you about this.
Okay.
But I actually was thinking the same thing, and I was just trying to not say it. But since you opened the door to talking about lint, the point Graham made earlier about people just putting stuff into the credential store, and that's like a common mistake people make. I'm wondering how many of these things we could detect, not just by looking, also certainly by looking at your backup descriptor, because right now we're only pushing you to that, like, hey, please put a backup descriptor in here if you haven't done that. But we don't really go further than that. We don't really know if that one, I think we don't do much validation to make sure that like you haven't done something new, right? That you haven't thought about for your backup. So if you add some new folder somewhere that isn't actually covered by your descriptor, should we do something? Should we highlight things that you maybe need to update, some inconsistency between the two, right? Can you think of opportunities there for us to help developers?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll start. I think absolutely. When we have these known cases, there is more that we could do to help developers. I think also we have to do a better job of making the case to developers of why this is so important. 30 to 40% of users switch their phone each year, and it's not just getting a new phone, it's if they have to factory reset it for repairs, so if it gets broken. A lot of the time that's a really high churn moment because the user gets a new device, they get set up and they have to re-log in, and we know that is where a lot of users drop off. So I think there's definitely that. Let's make it easier to support, but also we need to do a better job of articulating to developers why this is so fundamental to their app's experience.
Yeah, I agree. I wish there was some way to push the remaining developers. It's very irritating when this happens.
So actually, I was thinking, like, I remember the dark days when really not much happened. Like, not only did I need to like reinstall all the stuff, or like, that game didn't bring down its data, but like most of my apps didn't come down at all. I had to remember which apps I had previously had installed on my phone, and it seems much better about bringing down most of at least the shells of my previous experience, in the worst case. But do we know all of the apps? Like, do we know everything that was installed, and we at least install the basic apps? Or is that up to the app developer just to say we want to be put on the new device?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because this is an area as Android that we've invested in a lot for the last couple of years, in the overall restore experience, making that as comprehensive as possible. So the user can opt in and out, but they, by default, like all apps, will be reinstalled on the new device. So I guess we think as Android, like our basic service to developers is if the user had your app on the last device, and it'll come over and be installed, and the notification settings and the permissions, where possible, and the user is selected to do so, will come across. And then we need the developer to go the extra mile on top of that. Outside of that, we've also focused a lot on bringing things like messages over more reliably, photos and videos if you're doing device to device, and just making the whole experience quicker. We recognize this is painful for users when they have to do it. And so as much as possible, the things that we as Android can control, we really focus on, because it makes such a big difference to when a user gets a new device. They're super excited to unbox their new device, and we really want to kind of sustain that momentum. And I guess what we're really asking is developers to join us in that journey and just do that last bit to ensure that, okay, they've got the app, it's on their device, it's installed, they open it up. And if we can land them in a similar state to they were before, same level on the game, same stuff in their basket, not having to log in, that's starting to get to an almost kind of magical experience for users switching devices.
I think installing apps automatically has also gotten better over the years. I think in the beginning, at least, like at Google, we typically have multiple accounts on our phones, which most users, I guess, don't. But in the beginning, I remember it would only restore the apps from your primary account, which was very annoying. And I think now we're doing it for all accounts, and it works very nicely.
The thing I've noticed, and maybe I've noticed that in some cases, even though I'm asking it to transfer everything, it still seems to be doing a lot of work to like reinstall the apps. And I'm going like, didn't you just transfer the binaries? Like, why are you installing them still?
I believe the apps are installed from Play Store, not
even when, and I'm not really sure why, especially when I'm going to what I think is compatible hardware. Like, I'm assuming that's what it is. Like, oh, listen, this is a slightly different chip or whatever, and so Play Store is going to serve some different binary combination. But I'm always surprised by that. It still heats up my phone, right, as it's installing 150 apps or whatever.
And it takes forever.
Yeah. Piyush.
Yeah. Just to add some more information, so we do transfer the APK splits, like the APKs across phones when you are doing device-to-device transfer. There are cases in which the apps could be incompatible, or like maybe the version is not right. We have seen instances of like where even after transferring the binaries, like we don't use them to install because of some reason. So it's an area of investigation that we have. But it shouldn't be the case where we download majority of the apps from Play Store. Like I think like that's something that shouldn't be the case, especially if you do a device-to-device transfer.
Yeah, this has definitely been an area of focus for us as well. Like, we do understand the time to install apps, particularly like Android power users who may have 200 apps, like I do, probably even more. Like, it takes longer than we'd want it to, and the thermal output of the device can be quite high. The reason is the actual, even if you have the APK file, the installation itself is quite intensive. So there's a limit to how much we can sort of do just by transferring and how much we can parallelize.
I see. So this is the native compilation step, and that one we don't transfer. So this is where like the baseline profiles are being inlined,
like the
and
DEX.
like that. Yeah, DEX to OAT.
Yeah, I wondered, like, Tor, you mentioned this in your question, like, why wouldn't we? Like, if you're going to the same architecture and we've already done the work of compiling that stuff, couldn't we transfer those files instead of just the APK and going through that again?
I believe that is one of the areas of investigation. I don't think it's straightforward, but yeah, absolutely, it's a thing we really want to try and improve. I think every time you're sort of sat waiting for the apps to be installed, it does feel painful, and again, it kind of erodes a bit of that magic that you get from a new device. So yeah, continued area of focus. I don't think there's many easy wins, but we're going to keep working on it for sure.
I mean, I think really, I mean, I kind of started out, like glass half full, like, okay, why is this a problem? Why was my wife upset with me? Because in some cases, like, I don't know if I have this password anymore. At least with the installation, you just wait and it's fine, right? It's the please developers, preserve. And that's what we're really, really hoping to get developers to do something. If you've opted out, please do the little bit of work, and then you have this big benefit to yourself that you can now very quickly replicate your favorite setup across all your devices and emulators and so on, which is great.
Even for Firebase devices, by the way.
Oh yeah, remote devices as well.
So these are devices you don't even own, and you have to now go through this whole setup.
And every time you disconnect, they're wiped. So
right.
Every single time you need this setup. Yeah, go ahead, Graham.
Yeah, I just want to pick up again on the password thing. That restoring authentication across devices, as we alluded to earlier, is tough. Just want to reiterate the restore credentials. It's in early access, but the idea is that makes it completely seamless. So you don't have to necessarily have to remember anything, and you can just get logged straight back in. We really think that this is the sort of most secure and most sort of developer friendly and user friendly way to do it, because I completely empathize with you, Tor. I've tried to be so diligent with a password manager, and still there are a number of apps on the new device that for some reason something's got out of sync, or I've got confused with which app I was logged in before, which account, and it's super painful.
Yeah,
and you only need like 4 or 5 of those, and it's
And ironically, my password manager does not transfer its data. Right?
That's a different podcast.
Yeah. Anyway.
I have a pet peeve that irks me a lot. And
this podcast is great for bug reporting. I mean, I'm not being sarcastic. We often solve a lot of problems here.
I wrote the original backup agent for Gmail back a long, long time ago. And when I wrote that, I realized that also I configure my apps like I have a different ringtone for every notification from every app. And I realized that it's not easy to back up and restore your notification chime, because Android has a media manager that uses IDs, and the IDs change whenever you switch a device. So I wrote a backup agent that took the name of the ringtone instead of the media ID. And then when you restored, it looked in your media manager and it tried to find.
So you're saying that if I used Gmail back in the day and I picked a different notification ringtone,
yep,
you were going to preserve it?
Yes.
Thank you.
So it doesn't work. It's broken now, I believe, because I have to restore it manually. But I would and today it's more complicated because notification ringtones are managed by Android system somehow, I believe, not by the apps.
I mean, this feels...
But I think we have the right team on board to take at least a look at it, right?
Group right here. I mean, this feels very much like the preserving permissions for the user, right? Like this is some system level stuff. We should just transfer that over. Right. So this feels like a bug.
Because we already restore...
I can't help with this. I'm sorry.
We already restore the ringtones. So... at least on Pixel devices, all my ringtones that, even custom ringtones that I created from audio clips 10 years ago are still being copied, preserved device to device. So they are copied over, but they're not assigned to the
ringtones?
app. Yes, I have all my, you too. I think if you look in your, if you try to change a ringtone, there's a folder there that's called My Ringtones. And if you ever uploaded an Elvis song as a ringtone, it'll still be there.
Yeah, no, it's more that I actually like that every few years, we refresh
you get
this.
new
so
ones.
it makes my,
But I want to have my old ones.
Yeah. So Graham, I'm assuming this either was on your radar or now it is.
It is, and it definitely falls within my area of responsibility, for better or for worse. But I think this is a great example, right? And this is why Alon's been such a great partner here, in someone that spends time customizing, getting the best out of Android. We really want to preserve that experience. If you spend that time, we really don't want you to have to spend that time again. It's tough. Like it changes every 6 months, every year, and we sort of have to run to keep up. We are trying, but there will be gaps, and if people can let us know where there are gaps, we know a lot of them, but we may be missing some. Please let us know. But I can't necessarily promise it'll be resolved next month.
I mean, that felt like a call to action. Right.
Yeah. To that point, how do they let you know? Is there a bug category that they should aim for to report the stuff?
That is a good question.
What is your personal Gmail address?
Yeah, exactly. There is a way to report this. There is a way to report this. We generally get so much internally from Googlers that our inboxes are very full with that. But no, I'm gonna have to dig out the details, because there is a way.
What we did for the recent KMP episode was that I think we created a special feedback alias that they put in the show notes. So, hopefully for this episode too, there'll be a link in the show notes or on the YouTube channel, or the team didn't want your feedback, and that's why there is.
Or if you do find a good bug category in the public bug reporter, we could put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea. Yeah. No, I mean, look, it's difficult to promise a resolution of these things, but we certainly welcome the feedback, and it's an area that we're really trying to improve on. So absolutely, I think the feedback would be very welcome.
Because we want to restore the user's confidence.
Absolutely.
We have to back it up first.
I think we have a podcast title. Yeah. So speaking of feedback, please, if you have any questions on this, you can also leave it on the YouTube channel that we have for this episode. Every couple of episodes, we'll go through the questions and see if there's any for us to answer. I don't think there were any this time that we're going to cover, but we'll do it in the next couple of episodes. And I think we have another call to action, which is to please try the latest. Is this in stable or is it in Canary still?
I think it's still in Canary.
Okay. So try the latest Studio Canary to check out the backup and restore tools and see how you're doing. Test it. It's now very convenient to see if your app is restoring data. And then please, if it's not restoring data, please do it.
Yeah, Android Studio does have a public backup and restore component, which I'm not sure they can file against it directly, but it does get routed to me.
Yeah, we funnel all, because we used to have people file bugs in the wrong category. That was worse. So now we'd have a single component, file it there, and then we do daily triage to put it in the right.
Yeah, it will get to my personal inbox.
All right. Well, thank you all so much.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.